The August 1st deadline passed and Trump did not get what he wanted. He had made it clear to the entire world, either you sign a trade deal with the United States before this date, or be ready for harsh new tariffs. But instead of complying, 90 countries simply turned around and walked away. No deals, no concessions, no fear. They did not believe his threat, and they were right. Now Trump is furious, and he is striking back. He is launching a wave of new tariffs that hit both allies and rivals. Canada, one of America's most reliable partners, got a 35% tariff. The list also includes Switzerland, Taiwan, Cambodia, and Thailand, with rates up to 39%. Trump has divided the world into three categories: those who complied, those who stalled, and those who dared to defy him. If you did not sign the deal, you pay. This no longer looks like normal trade policy. It has become something personal. Trump is walking away from deals, breaking alliances, and trying to remake the entire global trade system through pressure. And he is doing it at the worst possible time. The economy was already teetering on the edge. Many thought a recession had been avoided, but now this tariff shock could finally push it over. There is no plan B, neither for Trump nor for the world. Everything is moving straight into the eye of the storm. The world told Trump no, and now he is ready to burn everything down. So let's break down this chaos. Just hours before the deadline expired, an order was signed. The United States is imposing tariffs on goods from 67 countries and the European Union from 10 to 41%. Brazil received a base rate of 10% plus another 40% for political reasons, a total of 50. Canada's tariff was raised to 35%, Taiwan's to 20%, Switzerland's to 39%, South Africa's to 30%, and Pakistan's to 19%. The rest of the countries that did not sign a deal received a flat 10%. This is not a calculated trade policy. It is punishment dressed up as an executive order. A base 10% for everyone who failed to make a deal. More for those whom the administration believes went against the US line. No negotiations, no consultations, only unilateral measures. This approach ignores all principles of multilateral diplomacy. Trump once again cites the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, claiming that the trade deficit poses a national security threat. But US courts have already ruled such arguments unlawful when he imposed the so-called emergency tariffs. At that time, the court decided that a prolonged trade deficit does not constitute an emergency, yet the administration is repeating the same trick. This is a clear abuse of power. Global trade is built on agreements, rules, and mutual negotiations, but Trump is acting more like someone who simply imposes his terms. And all this is happening at lightning speed. Countries do not even have time to respond before the tariffs take effect. Meanwhile, as the global public reels from the shock, the Trump administration is pushing an entirely different version of events, boasting about the so-called success of its new trade policy. According to official statements, Japan, the EU, the United Kingdom, South Korea, Indonesia, the Philippines, and Pakistan have already signed deals with the United States. At first glance, this sounds like a diplomatic breakthrough, but upon closer inspection, it becomes clear. These agreements hardly look like real victories. Many of them seem more like a well-orchestrated PR stunt than the outcome of fair negotiations. As Politico writes, Trump is literally squeezing these countries like lemons. Most of these deals were announced at the last moment, just hours before the deadline or right after it. This shows how desperate these countries were to avoid punishment. They were not concerned with a long-term partnership. What worried them was the threat of tariffs. Take Japan, for example. It agreed to lower tariffs on auto parts and industrial goods, but in return, it promised to support US defense policy in Asia. And not only that, Japan also committed to investing around $550 billion into American projects. That is an astronomical sum, and it is hard to call this a fair deal. South Korea found itself in a similar situation. It was granted tariff reductions on electronics, but it also pledged to publicly support the United States on the issues of Taiwan and regional security. And that is already politics, not trade. The deal with the European Union was outright chaos. Instead of one unified agreement, EU countries began separate negotiations. Some were promised relief on agricultural regulations, others small concessions on auto parts or chemicals. What united them all was fear. Most were simply hoping to avoid the worst-case scenario. The United Kingdom was also cornered, a country still shaping its economic strategy after Brexit received limited exemption from tariffs on pharmaceuticals and financial services. But in return, London quietly abandoned a planned technology agreement with China, exactly what Washington had been seeking. In other words, a concession in one area turned into losses in another. Even countries like Indonesia and the Philippines, whose economies heavily depend on access to the American market, found themselves in an awkward position. Their deals essentially amounted to temporary tariff reductions in exchange for political concessions. In Manila's case, the government pledged to strengthen military cooperation with the United States in the South China Sea. In Jakarta, the price of the arrangement was an informal refusal to pursue Chinese-funded infrastructure projects. What all these agreements have in common is how they were reached. They were not the result of calm negotiations or shared interests. They were emergency measures taken under pressure. Most countries were not happy about the deals. They simply breathed a sigh of relief that they had avoided something worse. In such a system, tariffs are no longer just about trade, they are about submission. Access to the American market becomes a privilege reserved only for those who demonstrate political loyalty. Since Donald Trump came to power, even Canada has begun to act independently. Years of close partnership have been replaced by its own policy, especially toward China. The United States demanded that Canada cut ties with Chinese companies, particularly in the field of fifth-generation telecommunications. But Ottawa refused to comply. On climate policy, Canada also followed its own course. And in the trade war between the United States and China, Canada tried to remain neutral. Washington did not like such independence, and now Canada is facing 35% tariffs, not because it violated any rules, but because it began making its own decisions. Yet while Trump wielded tariffs, the consequences kept growing more serious. As soon as the new wave of tariffs began, global markets reacted as if to an earthquake. Stock indexes in Asia collapsed sharply. Red screens lit up in Tokyo, Seoul, and Mumbai. In the United States, markets also faltered. Traders realized that this was no longer economic policy, it was an ambush. Bond yields plunged. Investors began frantically searching for a safe haven. It was a troubling signal. Market participants were bracing for impact. And then, the August 1st jobs report came out and poured fuel on the fire. In July, only 73,000 jobs were created, compared to the forecast of 100,000, and the unemployment rate inched up to 4.2%. For the markets, this was not just a weak report. It was a warning sign that the American economy might start cracking under the weight of its own decisions. These figures cannot be viewed in isolation. They are part of a negative trend. Due to tariffs, production costs are rising. American companies that need Chinese components, semiconductors from Taiwan, or metals from Brazil are now overpaying simply to survive. And these costs do not disappear. They are passed down the chain all the way to the consumer. As a result, American families are paying more for food, smartphones, tools, medicine, diapers, and not because they did something wrong, but because other countries refused to comply with Washington's latest ultimatum. As it turned out, even signed deals are no guarantee of stability. South Korea, Indonesia, the United Kingdom, all signed limited agreements, yet tariffs still remained high. It is like signing a peace treaty, but the missiles keep falling. The Trump administration claims its tariff policy is targeted and strategic, that such a reset is a way to correct decades of unfavorable agreements. But even conservative economists are starting to doubt these calculations. The average U.S. tariff rate is now about 18%, the highest since the Smoot-Hawley Act of the 1930s. Back then, such a policy only deepened the Great Depression. So is history repeating itself? Officials say that the new tariffs could bring in between 450 and 500 billion US dollars in revenue. But at what cost? For every dollar from tariffs, several dollars are lost due to inflation, falling consumer spending, and retaliatory measures from other countries. Foreign direct investment in the United States has also slowed. Export-oriented industries, agriculture, aviation, technology are also suffering. Allies are gradually distancing themselves both politically and economically. Once, America led by example. Now it leads only through pressure. And the price for that is growing isolation. When trade deals are forced at the barrel of the tariff gun, it is no longer about partnership. It is an ultimatum. More and more American companies are asking themselves, is this America first or America alone? What is worse is that the very foundation of the global system is starting to crack. The World Trade Organization, the G7, even economic coordination within NATO, all of it is coming apart at the seams. If all countries start acting by the same principle, the result will not be fair trade, but fragmented markets, rising protectionism, and nationalism. What is happening now is not just a revision of trade rules, it is a geopolitical earthquake. And like any earthquake, it will leave behind long and heavy consequences that will be felt for many years to come. And if you are interested in news from the global stage, subscribe to the channel and do not miss the next video.